Nothing in this world is certain except for death, taxes, and having to rank your favourite Star Wars films. Everyone has their own opinions on which Star Wars film is the best, which is the worst, and where the others sit in between. So after recently hitting 1,000 subscribers, I thought I would get this out of the way and give you my own rankings. Now I know that this won't please everyone, but as the old saying goes, each to their own. So at the bottom of my list is Episode 2 Attack of the Clones, the film that relied most upon visual effects at a time when they hadn't been perfected. Now to be fair to the film, it certainly was different to anything we had seen before. We got a better look at Coruscant, we were introduced to the clones, and the battle at the end of the film was pretty decent. Unfortunately the film has aged terribly, but this isn't necessarily the only reason why it's bottom of my list. The fact that they gave Obi-Wan a mullet, the dialogue in the film being cringeworthy and cheesy in a really bad way, Anakin coming across as a really creepy, arrogant teenager with very few redeemable qualities, and of course, there were plenty of holes in the plot. Now, if they'd only made Anakin a more sympathetic, likeable character like in the Clone Wars, it may not have been so bad. Next up is the first chronological film in the saga, the very first of the prequel films that was released way back in 1999. Now I can appreciate that with a new trilogy, George Lucas was trying to do something new and groundbreaking, but when the very first thing you read about in the opening crawl is taxes and trade routes, you start getting a bad feeling. Again, the film is not completely without merit. We got the amazing fight scene, and Duel of the Fates is possibly the most iconic piece of music to come out of the prequel films. The pod race was entertaining and different in a good way. A way that made us go, wow, that was amazing. Unfortunately, the film doesn't really deliver on any more of those moments, stuck with a slow-moving plot about a droid invasion of a planet that we don't really see that much of, tied in with the bumbling antics of Jar Jar Binks, and the questionable decision to cast Anakin at a very young age, meant this film fell rather flat. So, here we go, the most divisive Star Wars film there is. It probably won't come as a surprise to anyone who has seen my Last Jedi review that this film is so low on the list, but for those who are surprised, let me try and explain myself. The film tried to go in a new and bold direction, and I can appreciate the courage it takes to try and do that with a Star Wars film. As a standalone film, it may not have been as controversial. I found the pacing of the film to be very chaotic, plot holes were present throughout the majority of the film, and I won't really go into what they did to Luke. Go and check out my review if you want to hear more about that. Now, I'm not saying the film was terrible, but in my opinion, it wasn't great. The most recent of the Star Wars films, Solo is a fun adventure that at first I was dreading would be a disaster, and whilst it didn't soar at the box office, it was certainly a decent action-packed movie. I enjoyed the fact that this film felt more focused on just one character, something that we hadn't really had happen in a Star Wars film before. Han was really the only person that mattered in this film, and it was all the better for it. It wasn't brilliant, and I certainly think that the film will be viewed as a failure, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. The third and best, in my opinion, chapter of the prequel trilogy, it was again a film that had its problems with its reliance on green screen technology and questionable directing. However, it was so much grander than the first two prequel films. It opens up with a huge space battle and it doesn't really slow down from there. The best thing about this film was that we got to see Ian McDiarmid shine as Palpatine, something I'd wanted to see more than the eventual Anakin turning to Vader scene. It's still difficult to go back and watch Order 66, especially after the Clone Wars gave such depth to many of the characters, but I still think it was better than most people give it credit for. The hype I experienced for this film was unlike anything else I'd experienced before. The trailers were perfect, the build-up was magical, and sitting in the cinema watching this was a moment I'll never forget. Now, after the hype died down and I had some time to settle my thoughts, I realised it wasn't as great as I first had thought. But it was still a really fun film that recaptured that Star Wars magic. Sure, it borrowed a lot of the story structure from previous films, but did that make seeing Han Solo again any less of an experience? Hell no. Kylo Ren turned out to be one of my favourite Star Wars characters. He isn't just another Vader ripoff, nor is he a bland evil dude. He's complex and he's unpredictable. Now, whilst this film was not the perfect way to introduce the sequel trilogy, it did its job, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing J.J. Abrams back in the director's chair for Episode 9. Rogue One was the first Star Wars film to have diverged away from the main saga. It was a huge risk for Lucasfilm to take, and if it had failed, it may well have been the only anthology film that was made. However, this film was no failure. Taking us back to the events just before Episode 4, it recaptured the look and feel of the original films, but brought them into the modern day cinematic experience. You could say that the characters for the most part weren't really memorable, nor were they developed extremely deeply, but they were likeable enough to make the story work. The action in this film was the best in any Star Wars film to date, including the tremendous space battle. The story wasn't afraid to go to dark places, and considering the whole film was in chaos just a few months before its premiere, they did a hell of a job here. Oh, and that Vader scene, I don't think I've ever fanboyed that hard in my life. Now, it's probably not too much of a surprise that the original trilogy films are in my top 3. I think a lot of people would have them there as well. A New Hope is where it all began back in 1977, a groundbreaking, genre-defining film that forever changed the world for the better. At its core, it's really a very simple story. A young, good-hearted kid goes and saves the princess and defeats the evil Empire. But the layers that were added on top of that really give the story its depth. The introduction of the Force, the look of the film was unique, and the effects were way beyond what was thought possible in 1977. I'll always love this tale. Even if the special editions have ruined some of the nostalgia, it will always be one of my favourite films of all time. Don't shoot me just yet. I know most of you expected this to be number 1, but it's not. It's a very close second. Touted as the very best of the Star Wars films, it took what was established in Episode 4 and went above and beyond. The way it escalated the war between the Rebels and the Empire, the darker tone, and the complex character relationships really give this film an extra level of feeling. The tense asteroid chase and the introduction of new characters like Lando and Yoda really helped to make this film be one of the rare cases of a sequel being better than the original. Now, I like that this film makes you realise just how powerful the Empire is, and how small the rebellion is in comparison. It gave us a look at Vader's ruthless streak, and showed Luke as being determined but slightly arrogant in his attitude towards his training. This film is a cinematic masterpiece that could so very easily have gone wrong and buried the Star Wars universe for good. Perhaps a surprising number 1 for some. Certainly I found myself surprised when I was contemplating the order of these films. I hadn't realised just how much I had enjoyed this film, and how it has some of the most emotional moments of all of the saga films. So let's firstly address the elephant in the room, the Ewoks. Yes, looking back, it seems a little silly that these cuddly teddy bears could be capable of taking down the big bad evil Empire. But if you can look beyond that, then you can see what is really being told in the story. After all, the Ewoks were supposed to be Wookiees, but due to budget restrictions they had to go with the mini version. The story shows that no matter what the odds, if you have the determination to overcome evil, then you can win. The Rebel fleet is massively outnumbered, the Death Star is operational, Luke is outnumbered by the Master and the Apprentice, and the Rebels on the ground have been captured. It looked hopeless, but they kept fighting. Luke kept believing that he could turn his father to the light, and because of this, they triumphed. Now, the entire film could have just been 2 hours of interactions between Vader, Luke and the Emperor, and I would have loved it. That fight was simply perfection. Not flashy like in the prequels, not slow and methodic like with Vader and Obi-Wan, it was pure passion and heart from Luke and Vader. The Return of the Jedi really is an inspirational story, and when you add in factors like Ian McDiarmid's performance as Palpatine, the despicable actions of Jabba the Hutt, and the amazing space battle over Endor, it's really head and shoulders on top of my favourite Star Wars films list. So that's how the Star Wars films rank for myself. Now, I really want to just take some time to thank you guys who've supported me and helped me get this channel to over 1,000 subscribers in just 2 weeks since we launched. It really means a lot to me that you've shown such incredible support, and I can only hope that I keep delivering brilliant content for you. Now, what I want to know is, what is the order of your favourite Star Wars films? Let me know in the comments below, how do you rank the 10 films that there have been so far? I'm sure there's going to be a lot of differing opinions, but I'd love to see it nonetheless. Now, if you have enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a like, and make sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss out on more great Star Wars content. And until next time, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you around.